Hello and welcome to episode 26 of Destroy Before Listening, which is a conversation between myself, Pete Byrne, and Sonny K. Sonny was vocalist for the VSS, Angel Hair and Year Future. He also founded the GSL label and Bottleneck Distribution, as well as being a graphic designer, art director for Sargent House, and digital collage artist. In 1997, the VSS travelled around Europe on the Nervous Circuits tour. Seeing them play here was a total eye-opener for me as a teenager. I was interested to know his perspective on touring the UK at that time and seeing bands here like Bob Tilton, Baby Harp Seal, Stalingrad, Hard to Swallow, Keto, Ebola and Red Monkey. This is the focus of the first bit of chat before a live VSS track leading into a section about Angel Hair and Gravity Records. There's a great chunk on this with lots of stories and facts I'd never heard before. The Angel Hair track leads into more philosophical reflections on punk and hardcore and its culture. It's a cool wide-ranging talk with an awesome figure in the underground scene of the past 30 years. Please like, share and subscribe. That would be greatly appreciated. And you can also follow on Instagram at Destroy Before Listening. Thanks. I was going to ask to kind of intro things as your sort of relationship to the British bands or UK bands, because you start with covers all your earlier bands. You've got like Bauhaus, Echo and the Bunnymen, Birthday Party even. You know, it's not exactly British bands from that time, that era and that sound. And like its importance to you basically growing up with that music and then coming over and experiencing things in the hardcore world.
Yeah, it was interesting because growing up in California, I naturally gravitated towards English music. It felt, for a lot of reasons, it spoke to me, and it was played a lot on the radio station K-Rock in LA that was sort of, a bit ubiquitous. So I was able to keep up on modern bands in England that way. Things like Echo and the Bunnymen in particular, and, the Smiths and New Order, all that stuff really got me excited about music. I mean, I was into music for as long as I could remember, but that stuff really started feeling like my own music, As I got into hardcore and, the DIY kind of culture and spirit, my love for that English, and as you mentioned, Australian, other kind of post-punk stuff never went away. And, it wasn't necessarily fashionable in hardcore at that time, around 1990 or so, to be, retrospective about post-punk stuff yet. It was too soon. People were still working out all the peculiar and tasteless iterations that hardcore came to in the late 80s, like where they're fusing it with everything from ska to funk to, you name it. There was all kinds of just lots of just weird concoctions that are just the natural evolution of people trying everything, right?
Yeah, I guess it takes decades almost to settle into being, something people want to look at again, or
yeah, for sure,
think about or whatever, or become modernized almost, or like postmodern idea mashing up.
Yeah,
everything. And now we've got post-punk, but it's not really post-punk anymore. It's pretty diluted because it doesn't sound like Birthday Party anymore.
Right. There's a whole other discussion, but there's so much of everything coming out all the time now, and so many groups that are really adept at a certain period or sound of another band. So that becomes a whole genre unto itself.
Yeah.
Like New Order in 1985. Like now there's 200 bands that sound just like the record Low Life. That's just, I don't know what that is. It's modern age, it's technology, it's human nature or something. But yeah, it was interesting to me, to get back to your other question, to go back to England finally as a touring band, playing music that the influences come from everywhere. And of course, as we're talking about, I had tried to bring those kind of influences to my own bands. The bands themselves that I was in were still very much a part of my experience in America, right? And being an American, and to have the incredible, just surreal opportunity to go back to the place, where I come from in the context of being a performer was very, it was just amazing and a weird thing. It was just, at the time, it was very, almost, I don't know, kind of like a dream. Maybe that sounds too.
It's something nobody could ever fathom, in the same way that I was just saying that, like, I couldn't really fathom this being the case. It's just another bizarre turn of events, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or turn of something being around for a longer period or something. It's like, I'm sure that's like that for a lot of people, meeting kind of people who are your idols, or like you looked up to and stuff, and it's a different setting. But you realize people are just everyone doesn't know what the fuck they're doing, basically.
Yeah, that's always the case, I would say. Yeah, it was cool getting to experience England as a relative outsider, and then seeing this whole new generation of bands playing a kind of music that I didn't associate with England, really.
Yeah, like I'm guessing you would have played with Bob Tilton.
We did play with them. I should get my flyers out. They're not far away from where I'm sitting. At the 1 in 12, it was just us and Bob Tilton, and literally just us and Bob Tilton. There was nobody at that show. Nobody came. There was
no audience.
I don't think anybody came to the show. I mean that. I don't think there was. I don't think there was a single paying person. The guy Simon Henderson, who was with us, who had set the tour up, took a great photo of us playing from, it seems like it's taken from halfway back across the room, and there's nobody between the camera and us. And that's how I remember it. And I remember them feeding us. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't unusual back then. It was my first tour, my first experience touring Europe, which I've done many times since then. The political aspect of the political reality of punk was way more present at places like the 1 in 12 Club. For us as the VSS, we're all dressed in black and I have lights and stuff. Like, I don't think they were impressed. I don't think that they felt we were necessarily even in the right venue.
Okay.
And the fact that nobody came to the show, I think for the people running it, probably it was a bit like insult to injury. You know what I mean? But we got that a lot, even in places where we did on that tour seem to, by accident, draw a few people. Most of the time, the promoters themselves seemed kind of indifferent to it and a little bit confused. And anyway, so I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here.
That's cool. And well, I mean, Baby Hop Seal as well, because what did you think of like those bands particularly? Because they're like the sort of nearer thing to the kind of influence of bands like Hoover or Stint. That kind of lead six thing was pretty big, where it was big, the main thing in the like mid-90s, with that stuff, that sound. Yeah,
it was cool. I mean, we really were grateful to play with Bob Tilton. We'd heard the name. I think I used to distribute records back around then.
Is this Bottleneck?
Yes, exactly. And I had traded a lot of records with that label, Subjugation.
Yeah.
And many other labels. And so I had some Bob Tilton 7-inches, I think, prior to us coming over. And then afterwards we had the LP. I remember liking the LP a lot. So yeah, I mean, they like Bob Tilton was certainly a standout. We wound up playing with a lot of funny, I mentioned we played with the group Stalingrad in Glasgow, who were kind of a more like anarcho sort of thing. And
would have been Hard to Swallow, I think, as well, was another one.
Hard to Swallow, yeah. We played with them in Liverpool and Ebola. They were Ebola. I had known sort of, and we were staying with this guy Nick out of Ebola, who had a label that I'm forgetting the name of now.
Oh, is that Enslaved?
Yeah. Wow, good.
Yeah, it would have been later, because there was two versions. There was like an earlier sort of version of Ebola, and then there was the later one with Nick, where they were just like, it was just more full on, more of a kind of full on thing. It was when bands, had two vocalists, more of a two vocalist thing. That was another band who was local, who played a lot around here, and it was just kind of eye opener as to well, there's these like kind of this fast noisy thing going on.
Yeah. They were great. I mean, they were the only band like that we played with by far. We played with, especially in Europe, there were still a lot of people like doing the Rage Against the Machine type of thing.
Okay.
Kind of weird, like hardcore funk
Yeah.
crossover. But yeah, I mean, Bola ripped, and I remember we stayed with them for at least a couple. I think we were there for a couple of days. I remember meeting Sned from
Okay. Yeah.
from Flat Earth.
Yeah.
That VSS tour was right as it was sort of at the pinnacle of Bottleneck being a useful thing, right, for other labels. And I remember really using that trip to further the cause of what we were doing. And I remember I was already trading through the post with Nick and certainly a lot of other people. But I remember sort of kind of, I can't remember, I just feel like we were stacking up records everywhere we went. I feel like we were trading records a lot. And in fact, now I remember clearly, we came back with a whole bunch of records from Slamped in Newcastle.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And they, and I wound up, trading more records with them sort of over the years and being friendly with Red Monkey and stuff. When we played with them was our first time meeting them. And I sort of, gave them the pitch for Bottleneck, and they were, more than happy to oblige. And we went and got these records, I think, from a storage place or maybe from somewhere, even just in their flat. They might have had all these records piled up. But anyway, we wound up carrying these records back to the US with us. And then when we were playing in Washington, D.C., after our show that night, our van was broken into and all these records were stolen. Okay. But the thieves, didn't get very far with them. They're heavy and they weren't, they weren't the Rolling Stones or something that they knew they could sell. So they wound up ditching these records and actually got them back, most of them. It's just a funny story. But,
well, I mean, Red Monkey's another band that came over to America around that time as well.
Yeah, they did very well over here. I think they toured with, I want to say they maybe toured with Erase Errata. And I think, they were on a label, Trouble Man, that was very well known and was very, very hip for a while. And there was all kinds of bands crisscrossing and hooking up with each other, for shows here and there. I remember being on part of that. Maybe they were playing with The Locust.
Okay, that's well. They're another band that could just sort of just stick them on any bill, and they don't. It's not a sore thumb. They're not. They're just like they could just fit in.
Yeah,
whatever it is.
Yeah,
bands like that. It's always like kind of fascinating, isn't it? That there's just some attraction they can play. They're like it doesn't matter. But
they tick a lot of boxes for people. It's funny. They've got an edge. They're not offensive. They're musicians band. They can all really play, but they're not. It's not boring. It makes sense to me.
Well, I'm interested. When you played like Europe, you were saying you played with some pretty sketchy bands, but were there any like? Because that was when there's a whole kind of thing in Germany, and France as well.
Mm-hmm.
Acme and Morse and Ancestral and stuff, and Fingerprint and Jasmine and things you probably would have heard through trading records as well.
Absolutely. So all of that more, stuff that I would classify more as like kind of grind or metal type hardcore, Morzer and Sistral and these bands. I feel like in my memory of that time, that stuff didn't get on my radar personally until a year or two later, distributing those records. And I think some of those bands come in and touring. I used to go to Gilman once or twice a week. So I saw virtually every band that toured in California for a few years. From anywhere in the world, I saw at Gilman. I remember seeing some variation of those bands on tour at some point. I seem to remember watching Morzer at Gilman. And I don't know if that's a phantom memory, but I think that happened. When we did that tour as the VSS tour, there was just the one time in 97, and it was it was booked entirely by our friend from Glasgow, a guy named Simon Henderson, who was in a band called Curl.
Yeah, I remember Curl, seeing Curl early on as well. Yeah.
Yeah, he had a label too to put out their records. I can't remember what that was called, but
It was Class because he had a
yeah, right,
distribution.
yeah,
Yeah.
very good. Gosh, you're great. Yeah, I think he took aesthetically took a big cue from Subjugation and stuff. It seemed like that was the realm it was in. Anyway, he had set the tour up, and I think he largely did it. I don't really know what he used as far as his network.
Yeah,
those contacts. Clearly, some people had come through Glasgow that he knew or something, but I think it was just getting getting numbers off of other promoters and that sort of thing, or just asking where to go next, sort of thing. But we wound up playing we wound up playing in just a lot of weird places, like on off nights, and no one knew we were at that point. We weren't established. Nobody was trying to play with us. And so in a few places we had, again, from the trading records or whatever, I kind of knew a few people here and there. So, for example, I do remember you mentioned Fingerprint. We didn't play with anybody that significant, but I remember going to Chantilly or somewhere in France and meeting the guy from Opstand, I think, who ran a label. I think he was doing the show.
Stonehenge.
Yes, exactly.
Because you probably would have traded with stuff like that as well.
Yeah, Christoph, that was his name.
Yeah.
He set up that show. So it's like we were kind of connected to some of those people in a way, with them organizing shows here and there. I hate to say it, but we didn't really play with any of those kind of like legendary bands at that time. We did play a whole bunch of shows with a group who we loved in the moment, who I had met through the mail, trading records. They were on a label from the Czech Republic called Day After Records. And they were called Sunshine. And the name was like, a weird, like lost in translation kind of thing. I mean, obviously it's not a lot. They know what sunshine means, but it was like, it wasn't meant ironically. But to anyone in America, a punk band called it Sunshine, it's like, what are you talking about? That just seems so weird. But we loved them, and they were not a hardcore band. They were a weird Eastern European. Imagine if you take the birthday party and somehow whittle it down from 5 people into 3, and they're from Eastern Europe. That's what it felt like. We loved them. We were friendly with them before we saw them play, and they agreed to help us book some shows. So we did 2 or 3 shows in Germany with them, and then 3 or 4 shows in the Czech Republic. Honestly, we didn't expect to like them, because their first record we didn't like. But they were enthusiastic about setting up these shows, so we had nothing to lose. And so at the first show we played with them in Germany, in this place called Tübingen, they set up and played and blew our minds. Like, I remember me and the drummer Dave Clifford standing in front of the stage, just I mean, it was as usual on that tour, a very underattended show. And we just sat there and kept looking at each other, just like, this is unbelievably cool. It was just a weird, surreal thing to be seeing this incredible band play to nobody in this weird place in Germany that we'd never been before,
How was the acceptance sort of in mainland Europe with the VSS? I mean, you talk about some of the shows being pretty just like, underattended to, about as underattended as you could possibly get. I mean, did you play anywhere like where it kind of really went down well, or?
Yeah, we did. There were a couple of shows, a couple of those shows in the Czech Republic, actually, Prague, and then a place called Sokolov, that were both, like maybe a Friday and Saturday night kind of thing, and were very hyped in advance. There was hundreds of people there drinking these huge, cheap beers, and those shows went about as good as anything on that tour, meaning that people were interested, if not confused. I think the light thing just left people for the most part utterly like, I don't want to say this across the board because there was a few little shows that were just killer and people got into the whole thing. The show in London at the Red Eye was probably one of the best shows we ever played, to about 50 people. And, there was no antagonistic element to it at all. But those shows in the Czech Republic, particularly in Prague, people were confrontational. And the place we played in Prague, this venue I've been back to many times, 007, is a big basement beer hall. And the stage is kind of like, I don't know, it's almost got like something coming down in the front of it and stairs going up. So you almost feel like you're on the stage, you're in this little letterbox, and the audience are able to like step up. They're able to put their feet up on the stage. And when the place is full and it was a pretty volatile situation, and people weren't necessarily enjoying the show. They were being provocative, and it was it ultimately ended fine, but it also felt a little bit scary. But to answer your question, like, I think when the VSS went and toured Europe, people were ready for Angel Hair, right? People were just finding out about Angel Hair. They were excited about it. When Angel Hair had toured in the States, we always inspired excitement. People loved what we were doing. People would go crazy. It was the right music at that time. It was in the moment. It had the right energy, and it had a little zeitgeist about it. So did the VSS in a different way later. But when we went to Europe, like I said, the message hadn't reached them yet, right? And they were still, there's the early Gravity stuff. You're talking about getting into those early Gravity records in like 96, right?
Yeah.
Well, we were over there in 97, still selling largely those same records, and people were just, still just getting them for the first time. And to us, like, that you mentioned the Born Again split, that had come out in 93, right? So it was 4 years old at the time, but the distribution network for it was so poor, it hadn't really made it over there yet. So there was this kind of I don't want to say a lag, because like, it kind of like insinuates that you guys were slow over there. It's not like that. It's just, it wasn't the nature of anybody being slow. It was the nature of the world back then. Things took time. But nothing was immediate like it is now. But by the time Angel Hair was an interest in England or anywhere in Europe, we were already doing the VSS, and the VSS, it was a weirder thing. And it was, for some people who are purists and believe punk should be one kind of thing or have one kind of aesthetic value, it kind of seemed like a finger to them, and not everybody not everybody was constructive in their criticism of it, right? It's a shame we weren't more established as a band before we went to Europe, and particularly in the UK, because I think we could have wound up playing with, a lot of bands who I think, we admired and maybe had more.
That's kind of hindsight now, though, isn't it? It's all like, well, fuck, if only everyone had known
exactly,
that, the future would happen, kind of thing. It's just a bit,
But at the time, the whole like Gravity thing there, which Angel Hair was certainly like flag wavers for that.
That was one of those things that changed things for a lot of people, I think.
I agree with you.
It like zones in. It's someone else not of the area, so in that respect, but like that's the immediate sort of forebear. Like you have, before Moss Icon, anything like that, there's a few bits and pieces, but then it takes the band like to pull it into something, and then people are like, oh yeah, shit,
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
We need to think a bit harder about what's going on here.
But when we went, when the VSS toured over there, we felt like we were trying to evolve the quote unquote Gravity thing. You know what I mean? That's still where our hearts and our minds were. Our records, we put out an EP on Gravity at that point, and we're recording our records there. it was a weird moment for us, and it was a weird moment for that whole scene, if you will, because, you know, without getting into the specifics too much, I don't want to bore anybody, but like when Angel Hair became the VSS, it wasn't an easy transition for all parties involved, right? We chose to be a different kind of group because we lost our drummer. Our drummer is what gave Angel Hair the ability to be as agile and as fast as we were, and as tight and technical. Yeah. And without him, we just knew that we would just, you know, it was just going to be a different beast entirely. And so we preempted that by, you know, although we still were kind of working within the same scene of bands and we were still the same people, we started wearing our influences on our sleeves a little bit more. And when we made a, you know, noticeable decision to kind of not be a hardcore band and to be kind of more open-ended sort of punk influenced thing with electronic influences, kind of like, you know, saying to the world, like, we are open to incorporating all sorts of stuff in this, not just this kind of like framework that we did in the last band. And it took a while for people to accept that. I don't know how else to say it. It was like, it doesn't seem like that difficult of an idea now. Mm-hmm. At the time, people were very regimented about what they wanted from punk and hardcore, right? And they
didn't want keyboards.
They didn't want keyboards, and you know, they had people like Green Day and the Offspring.
They didn't want people in black with light shows either.
They really didn't. Yeah, they didn't. I mean, we were, I think, as unwelcome as the mainstream punk pop bands who were getting so much grief for being sellouts. We felt like we were being. The irony is that we felt we were being truer to ourselves and the spirit of punk, and even to a degree hardcore, by doing whatever we wanted and bringing in this theatrical element, because the whole point of that was like us saying to everybody, like, guys, like, you've taken all the fun out of it, right? Like, for us to come back and try and play hardcore with a drummer who was admittedly like learning his instrument, he wasn't as capable. We couldn't have played an Angel Hair song to save our lives, right? He couldn't have. Yeah. And so rather than create an awkward situation for him, we were all happy to just switch gears and, like, you know, go in a different direction. But we hoped that, you know, being who we were personally and representing all the things that we did already, that we would pull some people with us and win some people over to sort of like our side or whatever. Not that it was like that. And we did. And that happened immediately in some places, and in other places it was slower. And, you know, I'll be honest, like, certainly there was more resistance to all that stuff in Europe and in Britain in particular, in pockets. What's ironic is that I felt like in a few cities, people welcomed it with open arms and were really enthusiastic about it, specifically London. I've been back to the north of England, and I've been back to Scotland many times with Locust and many other bands. And I realized part of it is cultural. Part of it is like a certain degree of built-in pushback you get up there, because people just have less tolerance for bullshit. And that's baked into the people there.
This was something that's like another aspect that made me interested when you said, you know, your background is like from here, you know, like Middlesbrough, isn't it?
Well, I grew up in, my mom's from Middlesbrough. I grew up down in like Southampton.
So obviously it throws back to your roots are kind of far roots local. Mm-hmm. something that doesn't really ever, I don't know, I've never heard anything, is Matt Anderson's Gravity Records recording techniques. Because I know what did he have and where did he record it? Because it just seems like wherever, you throw some mics up or throw some stuff and then, oh shit, we need to do the vocals. Oh, is it the angel hair stuff? It says recorded later in a closet or something. And then where was this stuff recorded and how? Because I don't know how and where.
Matt started recording on this machine that was called an ADAT. And it was like, they look like videotapes. But it was a precursor to, modern digital recording, but it was sort of this big, I don't know. He had it all in this kind of cube thing. So the first time we recorded with him was in a suburb of San Diego called Chula Vista down near Mexico. And there was a guy who had a record label called...
Was that Vinyl Communications?
Yeah, Vinyl Communications, exactly. And his studio was called Neighborhood Recording. Matt was kind of like... he and Bob were good friends, and Bob let him use the studio for whatever he needed. So we recorded that Angel Hair EP there over a couple days. And if I remember correctly, the EP was actually done in layers. Like the drums were recorded first, then the bass, then the guitar kind of thing. It wasn't done live. But I did do I recorded the vocals there, but we were kind of running out of time. Our tour had to continue. We left town after a day or two. And so I flew back to San Diego a month later. We didn't have a studio to do it in. So Matt, he got rid of his roommates, and we just retracked the vocals in his bedroom, I guess using that same rig. I mean, it was just this box, right? Of course it would be sort of like, attached to a computer monitor or what have you, but I wasn't really paying that much attention, to be honest. But that record, I think, turned out well, sounded okay, and what have you. Yeah. When we came back and recorded subsequently later in the year, there was 2 more instances where we recorded with Matt for Angel Hair. And they were, by that point, he had moved into this place, this former office that was, that he lived in for a year or two. And it was also the studio. But, without throwing Matt under the bus, he's a dear friend of mine. I don't want to denigrate him or his past in any way. Like, he was not in a good place during that time. Over that year, 1994, he got progressively worse. And it's amazing to me that the recordings are as good as they are at all.
They're fucking great.
And what's really funny is, like, just recently I've been remixing and remastering that Angel Hair stuff. And it's being done by my friend with a really amazing studio here, a very modern, high-end, expensive studio. And he got those tapes from Matt, and he called me and said, I just can't believe how well this stuff is tracked. It's funny because it wasn't produced very well and it wasn't mastered very well back then. The performances are great. The records don't necessarily sound that great. But now, and all these years later, being able to take it into a real studio, they actually have been, like, Pete's gone in and pulled it apart. He can actually go in and, like, tweak the cymbals, tweak everything. It's amazing. And it's really like a testament to Matt's skills that he, like, despite everything that was going on, he managed to, like, really prove himself as an engineer. And so that place was called, on the records, that studio is called Bankers Hill, because that's the part of San Diego that it's in. But it wasn't there for very long, and it wasn't a real studio, quote unquote. You know what I mean? It was that ADAT setup in rooms that weren't soundproofed. They're basically like, there had been some kind of shitty office there, like car rental place or something, and they moved out, and Matt moved in, and, like, literally that was it. It was, like, ready to go as a studio. Like, no no building anything. It was just like they just started screen printing records in one room and making records in the other room. And it was, even with all the weirdness and the drugs and the strange people coming and going, it was still very inspiring to be part of that.
That's fascinating, really. It's amazing to hear. That process, that's what I love. That's how it should be,
Yeah.
you know.
And then the last time we recorded there was when we did the Angel Hair 12-inch. And as usual, we drove straight from Colorado to San Diego, which is about 20-hour drive. And we arrived in the evening just in time to unload and play this show there at the studio with Klickitat and Katawi. And I'll never forget it because this was the only time I ever saw them do this. Somehow they got dry ice and they put little bits of it in these paper cups all along the tops of the amps. So there was this like a Frankenstein's lab kind of fog rolling down the front of the amps while they played. It was just the coolest thing I'd ever seen in a DIY space. It was like just it had so much atmosphere. Every time that band played was a I don't want to get melodramatic and say it was a religious experience, but it was very close. There's not a lot of bands have made me feel that way in my life. I mean, I've seen a million bands play and I've been in a million tiny places, and there's always an energy in a small room and loud music, and especially when everyone knows each other and loves the fact that they're there. But every now and then there's something that transcends even that and is just so thrilling for one reason or another.
That was the case with that type of very intimate setting, with seeing the VSS and the Broken Doll, and I was at that young age as well, like whatever it was, 16, 17, and it's like you're just fucking in the audience on level, in people's faces, just like it's like, well, this is real, something like actually, so this is like nobody's fucking around trying to play doing something. It's like it's a confrontational, sort of aggressive, but not in any like a conventional sense of just. It's a different take on something that it just gets you unexpected, which was like what the Gravity stuff was like when it came out. It was like, oh, what the hell is this going to sound like? It looks bizarre. What does it sound like? It sounds bizarre.
Was it you who was asking me about the Heat record?
Maybe. I mean, I've been listening to my 7 inches and stuff, and that was one of them. That was that and the Physics record and stuff as well. The CD. Just other things, the staccato reeds.
Oh yeah.
It was just bizarre.
They're all cool little, just sort of short-lived, in most cases, project type of groups that feature. It's usually one or two people from another group that you've probably heard of. Staccato reeds is one guy from Rocket from the Crypt, and God, who else is in it? Can't remember.
A Day Called Zero.
Same with that. One of those guys.
The drummer.
Yep. Yeah, Heat was the same thing. Heat was this guy named Michael who was in Klickitat at the end. He played keyboards for like the last 6 months or so. And then he had his own band after that called the Young Destroyers that he was the singer of. And Heat was another band in that process. I think that they were only around like 6 months, but that was the golden age, the end of the 90s, where you could be a label and put out nearly anything on the 7-inch and be virtually guaranteed to sell like 1,000 of them. I mean, that's unthinkable now. And it has been for a long. It has been for most of the 2000s, but.
I mean that you must have. That was like the like a peak transition time that you were in bands that you must have seen. Running a distribution as well, and then doing Your Future as well. It's just like you can kind of see. Well, you see that being the case. People do 7-inch sell fuckloads to people not really. It doesn't exist in the same space at all. Like that trading and that distribution and that network and the digital side of things. Just, I think that's a thing that a lot of bands didn't really see and didn't really know how to embrace. And anyway, well, they would do now.
That's true. Yeah. there was such a momentum to the whole Gravity thing for the first few years, right? From about 93, 94 till about 98 or so. And then it sort of, because Gravity kind of was, I don't know how else to say it. Gravity just kind of, they put out the Rapture, right? That was like the last big thing that they put out. But prior to that, for a few years, he just kind of let it drift. And he was sorting out his life. And in the void that he left, other things kind of, other scenes in California and stuff kind of like
overtook or caught up.
Kind of, yeah. There was like in the San Francisco, there was like the whole scene around Erase Errata and all those bands that eventually, became Coach Whips and that kind of all that. Then sort of San Francisco kind of noisy post-hardcore scene. Like a lot of those groups went on to big national and international attention. It's conceivable that if Gravity had been had been a more viable option as a label, that Gravity could have been part of that stuff. But he wasn't prepared, and in the sense that things moved on without him, right? And
well, I think that's happened with, like, you could just list off and keep
absolutely
the names of labels that kind of died.
For speaking personally for me, like going from the Angel Hair to the VSS was difficult enough, but eventually everybody kind of like caught on and liked the VSS and it worked. Everything worked out. By the time we did Your Future, it's only about 5 years or 6 years later, really 7 years later, I realized it really, doing those Your Future tours really made me appreciate even more how lucky Angel Hair and the VSS had been. That we had the, that we just were in the right place at the right time. We fell in with Matt. He enjoyed what we were doing. We were able to get having that name on our records changed everything, right? Like people immediately took us seriously here in a way that they never would have, and overnight it just kind of like was just like a stamp of approval in a way. But also, like, more importantly than that, it was like it connected us with this other community of bands that were our favorite bands, that were what we thought were like the most interesting things happening at that time. And by the time Your Future was on the road and putting out records and stuff, it's ironic because our records were coming out on GSL. GSL was associated with the Mars Volta, largely a much bigger band. Many more eyes on what GSL was doing than what Gravity was doing back then. And yet, no matter where we went, I never felt like we were it never felt like we were within our element, if that makes sense. When we were in Angel Hair, we would arrive somewhere and it was like a big deal that we were there. It was like, now the show can go on, kind of thing, which was very flattering. And we didn't even feel like we deserved that, but it was awesome. Right. And whereas with Your Future, from the very beginning, actually more so at the end of the band, because by the time we did the last tour, it was a different lineup and stuff. But it really felt like we're out on a limb, just kind of like, I just felt like, wow, this is probably what most bands feel like. They just don't exist in a community. They're just out here doing their thing, hoping that somebody comes, hoping that they connect with someone or someone remembers them from the last time they came through. And it was a very humbling thing, actually, because, again, I just realized just how great the experience had been before, and how rewarding it is to feel, how validating it is to like have people, want you to come and do it. And, it's not to say Your Future never had a great show. And we had many of them. We had a lot of great opportunities, and a lot of our friends and bands gave us the opportunity to do things that we never would have by ourselves. But it was just different. It felt like the spirit of the stuff that that had carried the other bands had changed and wasn't there. And there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of factors in that. I mean, musically, your future was kind of different, and we were older and all those things. But I just, it really, I don't know, just it really drove home the point that being in a community of bands, especially one that people are excited about, like, it makes such a difference. I think I don't think there was necessarily anything. I'm so grateful that you love Gravity and you feel it's special. I do too. But I don't think in this great grand scheme of things, like aesthetically, it was very unique at the time, and certainly the bands were really cool. But I don't think that he had any kind of like. I don't think it was anything that couldn't happen somewhere else.
No, I know
what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it just takes one person, and it was just so happens it was that person, and that like set off the chain.
Yeah.
Before that, I was wondering, it's probably Moss Icon or someone anyway that inspired that whole thing. Anyway, I mean, there's a Moss Icon song called Gravity House. I've always wondered if that was in the way that the records were just. It was all kind of very, like you say, just silk screen it in a space that you got somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know if that's where he got the name. I certainly wouldn't be surprised at all. He's definitely, tight with Tony, and in the context of that moment in time, 1991 or so, that would make a lot of sense actually if he had done it for that. It's cool because there was a lot of other things happening around at the moment, but Gravity is the one that I think ironically is the art of it that stood the test of time and has differentiated it from other things, because it was not a particularly consistent label. Didn't last for a long time, at least the heyday of it. And, in terms of what record labels offer bands, it didn't offer anything other than just that nod of approval, right? That was the most valuable thing. That was worth in that context at that time. That was worth more than money. I don't know. I mean, I was very involved in punk and everything before Matt and Gravity, and I undoubtedly, like, many of the things in my life would have turned out the way they have regardless. But I definitely feel like Matt getting behind Angel Hair was something that continues to benefit me even to this day.
Yeah,
which I'm very grateful for, and it's also just funny and kind of surreal, And I just, I'm proud to have recently been asked to write the liner notes for this Heroin reissue that's coming out, which is really, I don't know, it's amazing that there's just something very rewarding about that after literally 3 decades. You know what I mean? That band and that record, that Paper Bag record, were so monumental to me and altered the course of so many things for me personally. That was really, really cool to be able to do that. And it's Angel Hair having any part of that story too is just really, like, we're very grateful. You know what I mean? And I'm grateful that people listen to that music and it still means anything to anybody. I'm grateful that there's labels now 30 years later willing to spend the money to put it back out there. And for my own amusement, want to see the Angel Hair thing presented in the way it was always intended. Only because I'm supremely happy to have been in that band. Like, those guys were some of my best friends, and those were some of the best times of my life. But also, like, that record just fucking rips. And it doesn't rip because of me. It rips because of the 4 of them. It is so good. And it's never sounded the way it's supposed to. It's never sounded the way it was recorded. And there's still interest in it. So, like, I'm just so glad to be this sort of, like, I don't know, torchbearer, if you want, for Angel Hair, in a way to like, this is definitely me instigating this project because I want this record to exist for, forever. the example that you use for like an actor who was in a film once, they can sort of ride that celebrity nostalgia thing forever. I think that's true. I think there's some musicians who do that as well.
Oh, yeah,
I think when it comes to punk, I think punk just comes with a built-in kind of checks and balances system that maybe other cultures don't have quite so much. I think people are willing to take their figureheads to task in punk more, and they're more accessible, and they kind of keep them relevant and keep them true to their word. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with aging gracefully and not becoming a cartoon of the person you were in your 20s either. And it's so interesting that you mentioned that. Just your example is an actor in a film, because I feel so many times in my own experience over the years, especially living in California and stuff, being in the music scene in Los Angeles and stuff, having a label, going to a lot of shows and that kind of thing over the years, like I became acutely aware that there's this funny divide that doesn't get spoken about much in the popular media or anything, but I feel like there's this gulf between musicians and actors, and I feel like actors are rewarded for being fake. You know what I mean? They're rewarded for acting. They're rewarded for being shining examples of being untrue to themselves. Whereas musicians are rewarded for the exact opposite, or at least they are perceived as being the opposite, right? They're perceived as being like your music is bearing your soul. It's your truth. It's the opposite of acting. And at least these are like the sort of like popular conceptions of them, right? The two, like the yin and the yang. And it's so funny to witness people, particularly, what I'm talking about is like I've seen actors, in some cases famous actors, be completely intimidated in the presence of a musician that they love. And also just, I've seen people just kind of like wild out and act utterly foolish and embarrass themselves because because I just feel like they feel so awkward around like that. It's like oil and water. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, there's sort of like a level at which celebrity transcends all that, and everyone's just rich and famous and they can get along. But at least in the world that I've had experience in here and there on rare occasions, I've seen a weird thing that I think that permeates all levels of music, where music is just like, whether it's true or not, in the popular mind, I think music is one of the like most true forms of expression, right? I mean, there's poetry, there's all these other kind of things, but when it comes to the popular arts, I feel again like musicians, they're almost like modern religious figures, and I think for a lot of people they serve that function, right? And even in punk too, like again, like probably maybe more punk than anywhere else, there's these people who are iconic characters for one reason or another, but the ones who really remain true to their ideals, so to speak, are I think few and far between. And I don't think that there is necessarily anything inherently wrong with not being the person you were in your 20s. I think it's everyone adapts and evolves in their own way. But I don't know. I'm amazed. I'm amazed constantly at how many bands of the generations before my own have never broken up or have gotten back together and are still functioning, like dozens and dozens of them. Like, you know what I mean? It's staggering. And I don't even understand really where they're getting the energy to do it. I mean, some of these guys are really old. We live in a post, everything age, I guess. And I shouldn't be as routinely surprised by these things as I am, but it's hard.
Is it difficult for you to be, or not to be, cynical about these things still?
Well, I would think I would have been more I know I would have been more judgmental about it in my 20s and 30s.
Oh, yeah.
I would have been more snide, and I would have been looking down on these people as cashing in, taking a cash grab or something, which as a 50-year-old man looking at this situation and these people and what they're doing, if they are doing that, like, I don't think it's a cash grab. I think that reality is like you need an income. Most people need an income into their 60s. And if people love something that you've created in your life and want you to perform it in front of them, regardless of how old or inept you are, how bad it might sound, there's probably not a whole lot of reasons not to, right? I know a number of people in their late 50s and 60s who are doing this, who are people from, popular bands that have been around for 4 or 5 decades. Like, I don't knock them now. I would have, again, 20 or 30 years ago, I probably would have, but now I can see it for what it is. I'm not about to do it myself, but I respect that they're healthy enough that they can even still get up on stage and do it. That in itself is an accomplishment. The fact that some of them are still recording with new records with new bands and pushing themselves is fucking remarkable. I mean, I specifically talk about Keith Morris, who's a dear person and an awesome human being. And
he's like in his later 60s at this point.
He's diabetic.
Oh, dude.
He's not the healthiest person I've ever met now, but you know what? It doesn't stop him. And he's like at the top of his game. You know what I mean? He's like probably healthier now than he was in the 80s in circle jerks, like doing cocaine every day and beating his body into oblivion. And he's lived to enjoy this and be able to do this. And I think that's amazing. And I know that's, he's never stopped. And there's plenty of people have and have come back or whatever. I mean, I think in his case it's remarkable. And I think he's not somebody who's, as you said, resting on his laurels. He's putting out new music all the time.
Well, some people didn't really stop.
Yeah.
Or haven't really stopped. Yeah. But then other people, I'm thinking about maybe the people that did and then came back. It's just a kind of, because I remember maybe at the start of the 2000s when it was gradually creeping in, it was like, this band is going to like perform this album and it's, they're going to come back and they're going to play this album. And it's like, that's pretty cool. I mean, I'm thinking of Sonic Youth do Daydream Nation. And that's a big important album for me. And then to see it, it's cool and it's good, but it's at the same time, it's not quite, I don't know, there's something not quite there. And then that's maybe the personal aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or it enters a different space at that point, I think, doesn't it?
Look, when I talk about purists and stuff like that, like I admit to being one. Like I don't think anything reformed or regrouped or what have you after decades can possibly compare to the original. It's like apples and oranges. There's plenty of bands who I have had the opportunity to see. I lived in Vegas for a number of years, and there's a big festival there every summer called Punk Rock Bowling. Tons of bands get back together to play that festival, and then they wind up touring and stuff because it's so. I think it's inspiring because you haven't been a band for 20 years, and you get to play in front of 5,000 or 10,000 people, and you have this little moment in the sun, and you can do that thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. I've never seen anybody reform and play there who lived up to my expectations of them over 30 or 40 years. You know what I mean? The Buzzcocks at Punk Rock Bowling in 2019, or what it was, 2017, whenever it was, I saw them. I mean, I've been waiting to see that band for decades, and finally see them. It's just like, well, yeah, these are the songs, and okay, yeah, that is them playing them, like a couple of the guys, but it's contextually so far removed from how it was created and my own initial enjoyment of it, and my own understanding of it, and the place it occupies in my heart and my mind, right? So seeing them play was fine. I don't, it's okay, and just. A footnote in my life, funny thing.
it's one for people that kind of take the see the
Yeah,
Buzzcocks
exactly,
almost
exactly.
as
But
like
it wasn't, it wasn't like the first time seeing Fugazi or the first time
no,
seeing Melt Banana or the first, I mean, like there's a laundry list of your first times, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I mean, I don't knock anybody for doing it if they can do it. If there's an audience for it who wants to stand around in the sun in Las Vegas and see it, or anywhere else for that matter, I don't know. I feel
it's
disconnected from it, but I don't feel like it's wrong.
yeah. I know it's just in terms of like a progression in what you're seeing and what you're hearing. It's like, well, if I think back to when I saw, VSS, for example, to if I still heard that now, I'd still be like, what is this? What is this about? It's still like capture and captivate because it doesn't. Was it meant to be understood almost? If you know what I'm
Mm,
saying, was it meant to be? How was it meant to translate? How did you feel? Or were you just like, this is what is coming out of these people at this time, and
hmm
we don't control that,
hmm
so we don't control years later how people can interpret it
Yeah,
either. So
that's exactly true. I mean, it's for me, it's all the context of these things is everything. And once the moment has passed, it's very hard to understand it, even with videotape and even with, records and photos and stuff. It's like, I'm sure you're the same way. You can think of any show you've ever been to in your life and the feeling of being there. It's just it's not represented in the photos and the videos. It's like those things are two-dimensional representation of a 3D of a much more than 3D. You know what I mean? A show exists on many more dimensions, and it's the feeling in the room it can't be replicated. It's as simple as that. And so that applies to all this stuff. And while I think that we are at a point now where punk at 45 years into it, we have these legacy bands in some cases that have never gone away. I think now like the Subhumans or other groups like that who I think frankly deserve a medal at this point for like their commitment to something that has changed and reinvented itself so many times around them, and yet they've like they are this shining example of remaining true to something for very little financial reward, but culturally, like they're a a signpost
yeah,
that really means something. You know what I mean? And they might not be household names. They never will be, but they've they're an example of an effective means of resisting the tide of really everything, you know. But also, I think I just think it goes without saying, there's always going to be something underground somewhere, and it might not be in England, it might not be in America, it might be in the world's a big place. Um,
I think it's different places now. Really,
yeah,
it might. Well, what I would think is it's going to crop up in really bizarre places where there is a record and it's very specific, or is a specific scene, and it's only going to happen in fuck knows
yeah,
where, somewhere really
yeah,
obscure.
yeah. And we're seeing examples of that already. I mean, all over Asia. I mean, um, anywhere that there's a class of people who start to have where there's an element of society who can afford to spend money on so-called luxury goods. The kids learn musical instruments and stuff like. I mean, there are so many examples of that happening, but also it just so happens that the country is a police state, right? Just like the United States. So,
Yeah,
so there's this like built-in resistance to the government. There's a whole. What my point is that it means something to be punk in those places still. In a much more
yeah, yeah.
visceral and dangerous way. And that's always going to be going on. And so there's always going to be cool music bubbling up from somewhere that you weren't expecting. And it's going to start taking, it's weird because it's like, I think you could argue now that punk is in many ways like, although it's not one sound, it's an accumulation of sounds. It's almost becoming a folk music, in a sense, how it just kind of almost is like
It just gets passed around,
Yes, and it's
and
not, no one entirely reinvents the wheel. They just add another spoke to continue the metaphor, But
yeah,
I think, as technology changes and reality evolves, I don't. I think what punk isn't going to go away ever, right? I think punk is like it was like this cat that was let out of the bag. It's like painting, right? Painting's not going away. People start painting on cave walls, and now there's galleries and museums, right? Punk was an idea whose time had come, and it's not going to go back in the bottle, right? There's always going to be resistance. Now there's a name for it. Now there's a music for it, you know.
yeah,
And so what's cool to me is to what's exciting to me about it is the prospects of the mutations that will happen. And of course, kids in Jakarta, Indonesia, they know who the Misfits are, but like, they, okay, they might even go deeper than that. But like, my point is that there's like going to be these touchstone things that spark something, but then like the local iteration of that's going to be something that we don't even recognize, right? And it's and that
yeah,
and that's where you get innovation and cool things, and there'll be the whole cycle just starts over, and that's awesome. It's just like we're coming to the end of the first big one that we all recognize, and now people are dying, which is sad.
uh, yeah. Well, I think it would be cool to hear some. Well, just listen to certain types of music, or certain, like you say, strains or what have you. It's some of those just don't seem to have cropped up again or come back, or they were not understood and therefore not popular, but
Mm-hmm.
they weren't like they were still valid things, expressions and things. But it's like who is doing something that sounds like VSS or Year Future or Angel Hair or whatever now. I mean, I can't think of that style thing's been particularly. That hasn't like seen a resurgence anywhere. I don't think even in what would be a similar scene, like screamo or something you could say,
Mm.
or post punk or whatever. It just doesn't, that kind of like edge to it doesn't really. I don't know. I don't find it, which is maybe maybe I don't know what it is, but I just haven't. I haven't. I mean, I keep my eyes open and I would love it, but it just doesn't seem to
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't seem to happen.
Well, first of all, I'll say thank you for that, because somewhere in there, I think that's actually a compliment.
Yeah, 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 definitely.
But I tend to agree, but I think if these things go in cycles, and I work for this volunteer radio station here in Hot Springs. I do 2 radio shows a week, and one's kind of dub and what in England you would call grime kind of show, garage type of music, which
Okay, yeah.
isn't very well represented here, but I try. And the other show that I do on Fridays with a friend of mine is a punk and new wave type of show, but we try, we try and play like half classics and then half brand new things that no one's heard of, and we constantly are trying to one up each other by discovering some new awesome band that the other one doesn't know about and what have you. And it's been a lot of fun, and it's sort of forced me to keep up with a lot more new music than I probably would be otherwise. And
Yeah,
I don't disagree with you, but I have to say there's just a remarkably just a huge amount of music coming out all the time now,
yeah,
and it seems like more than ever because it's also overexposed now. When I was at my most obsessive about music in my, I don't know, probably early 20s and stuff, there was a huge value in the sense of mystery, right? There was a huge personal investment required, and time, and sometimes money or patience or whatever, to find out about bands or track their records down or wait for something from their fan club in the mail or whatever. Um,
yeah,
that's not how it is anymore. And to the contrary, like go on something like Spotify and have the computer knows what it's following knows what my interests are, knows who I'm following, and it's just feeding me new artists that are, for the most part, exactly the same kind of music.
Yeah.
Not the same kind of music as the VSS necessarily, but like within, there's like a million bands that are kind of like Interpol, right? There's a million bands that are kind of like the Fall. Well, maybe not the Fall, but there's a whole genre devoted to each of those bands now. The most telling thing about that, though, is to go to those bands' pages and see how many followers they have, or subscribers, and it's, sometimes it's surprisingly high, and you're thinking like, my God, that's 200,000 times more people than Angel Hair ever played to in our existence. You know what I mean? But then other times it's like, God, this band is killer. And you go and you look at their page and they've got like 400 fans. Wow. In that moment, you're like, there's so much of this stuff that this band is this good and it doesn't even matter. They're like, this song's been on YouTube. It was uploaded 2 years ago. It's had 300 plays.
Are these where like our algorithms sort of dictate you listening, or are you control? Are you being pushed in certain ways, or are you shooting it a bit wider and like open to this element of mystery? Or
I mean, it could be both, and I certainly go down some rabbit holes just because something looks interesting, because some photo looks interesting or a name's interesting or something. It's not as though these are fictitious groups. They really exist in the world. They occupy an apartment somewhere, and you can find out where their next gig is and stuff. So like, they are real bands playing out in the world. They just apparently don't have much of an audience. And maybe they're not touring, maybe they're not even trying, but they've put their song on Spotify. Eventually it's found its way to me. I've heard it and think it's great. And, thinking to myself, God, if this was 1982 and Magazine put this record out, this would be a big single. But this band has put this out and it's going,
nobody cares.
It's going completely it's less than trivial. That's bizarre to me. And it makes me wonder, I don't know. I mean, knowing the numbers was never an option when I was doing bands, right? Like knowing how many fans we had was an impossibility. And so we weren't distracted by that. But knowing now what kind of numbers good bands can expect.
Are people making the music kind of feeding the machine, so to speak? Are they just creators? Or is everyone like a content creator? So they're not like an individual expressing something, or are they just like producing things to kind of throw into the pit? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think, what you're saying is just, it describes the scenario that we're in with, I noticed with a lot of groups, where they just, they're not making albums, right? They're just like, leaking out these singles,
A couple of songs,
that are, I suppose for some band, there's always an exception. I suppose for some bands that works, and their singles are, I guess if your singles are always good, the whole thing is going to be a snowball and it's going to lead somewhere and be successful. But I see plenty of bands going that route and just kind of fizzling out, right? They go from one really good song to, the next couple that aren't so good. And so, it just makes me wonder what's going on in their rehearsal space. Like, is it a group of people standing around trying to, I guess my point is, like, I think there's something healthy about being a band that makes an album. Ultimately, I guess I've never really taken this stance before. I've never really come to this conclusion, but I think, if you're a musician or you're in a band and you're existing to just put out singles and you're judging your work on the feedback that you're getting from the internet, then you're doing it wrong. And you're doing it for the wrong reasons.
It's different if you make a body of work that people just can't fuck with, and then you're in, and then you're out. You got like 3 years, you bang, you fucking hit hard, stay just consistent, and then you're dead, and everyone's like, oh, that was a shame. Didn't really get enough time to appreciate it, but It's like tough shit, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, well, that's what happens sometimes, or should happen.
You use the example of Slint, and like imagine if they were writing their record one song at a time and putting it out on the internet. You know what I mean?
It'd take forever.
It would take forever, but it would have ruined it. You know what I mean? It would have they would have began adapting what they're doing to please the audience. And the beauty of that album being this concise time capsule that it is because Four Minds were focused on this thing for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And that's really what making art is.